The scene opens up where a girl was seen screaming for her life. As the girl was displayed, her clothes were totally torn off, and she had already been played. Just then, two monsters were seen talking about her. One of them asked the other if he did it by himself and why she didn't call him too. He replied that he was lucky as she just roamed the forest alone. The monster further asked the other what they should do with her. He then told him that they were in the middle of a mission so they could not move from their post, and stated that it was kind of a shame, but they had to dispose of her there. But the man there was a pervert, so he stopped him and asked to have fun with her before disposing of her. Hearing that, the man laughed and clarified that a woman with everyone was fun, but he sure wanted to have his own woman in the future. So, the other man stated that to do that he needed to be promoted to a great chieftain at least, and the man replied that they couldn't get promoted if they kept getting posted to the rear guards like that. The other man was about to assure his talk, but just then, he got shot by an arrow out of nowhere. As the arrow pierced his head, he felt a sensation and then fell on the ground, dead. The alive one went on his guard and asked who was there. On a closer look, he found a human and an elf and got shocked. As he got curious, he stated that the south had been protected by the lizard men, then asked how they came from the south. The human clarified that he had the intention of answering that. The monster got pissed and tried to get his hands over the naked woman lying there, but was stopped by an arrow attack. That attack was from the elf, and she told him that she guessed that all of them think alike. As that silly attack made him more pissed, he asked her if she thought that she could stop him with something like that, and then rushed at her to kill. But he was stopped by the human, who exclaimed that it was enough, and after telling him that, he sliced the monster's head from its top. After a while, the man exclaimed that it seemed like they were the only ones there, and then clarified that they were still in heat even as they were retreating. The elf added that they just followed their wild instincts after all. As the man curiously asked her if that would really come to an end, and she replied that she was sure that it would for that time. It was then disclosed that a long time ago, there was a great war, a war that lasted a great deal of time, and by the end of it, the entire continent of Vistonia was scarred with battlefields. People had long forgotten what triggered the war that had waged for the last 50 years, but for the 12 races, the war was only suffering. However, all things must come to an end, including that everlasting war too. The scenes turned, and some orcs were seen running, asking each other what did he mean by it had ended. One of them replied that he did not know and then asked him to head to the square, as he believed the king would tell them the details. It was all a hurdle, and one of them asked what was happening. As they all reached the square, they saw that the king was there along with his servant. The servant then asked them to be attentive and silent as there was an announcement. The king then announced, after calling them their orc children, that the war was over as they had decided to surrender and accept the treaty with the alliance of 4 races, and then concluded that he would speak of the terms of their surrender later on. And with the death of the demon's king named Jedigus, the war came to a sudden end. Furthermore, the union of 7 races who had lost their main fighting force was forced to accept their defeat by signing the treaty that called for unconditional surrender. However, the orcs there did not believe that they were losing that war. One from the crowd stated that it was right because they could still fight. Another added that they are not going to accept such a half-assed end, and then asked to let them fight and end that. They were furious to think how they could get women if they didn't fight, as they do not have any future if they do not have the women. Everything was burning because of war, corpses were all falling apart. And just then, a huge orc was seen who was told by a fairy that they had lost the battle. Time lapsed and 3 years had already passed, and he was sitting in a bar and was having a drink when someone asked someone if that was not a hero, as a hero was the title bestowed to the strongest orc, as the man that earned the title of the hero can attain anything that he wants, which includes property, weapons, food, authority, and the respect of every orc one could say that an orc could ever dream of. The man who asked that question was also sitting there in the bar and stated that as expected the hero sure looks cool, and he had always wanted to ask him about the story where he defeated Blackhead. The other orc there stopped him, asking him if he could not see that he was in the middle of enjoying the drink. As it was disclosed, the hero was the same orc from behind who was thinking that they had lost. The orcs continued their conversation, stating that he had also been thinking of talking with him for a while, but he could not dare to interrupt him, and the things that he was interested in knowing about him included that he wanted to know what kind of women he likes and if he liked human women. The other orc called him an idiot, stating that a man of his caliber would already be tired of human women that he could pick everywhere he goes, and then told him that he would not even see him at their mating room. Hearing that, the man asked if he had the legendary dragon women. Just then, it was disclosed that the truth was that he was in distress, as the one that had everything within his grasp, there was still something he could not reach, no matter how much he wished for. As he was about to leave from there, two of them bowed their heads to him and apologized, stating that he was a little guy, and he would surely teach him later. When the hero left, the orc stated that he really wanted to be like him, and the other called him a dumbass and clarified that there was no way that he could do that. Hearing that, the orc agreed and stated that he really wanted to know what kind of women he had laid up to today. On the other hand, when the hero heard of it, he thought of the women he had laid with and then declared that there was none. So, it was finally disclosed that he was the orc's hero, named Bash, and was 28 years old and also was a virgin. Bash was born during the midst of the Long War, and he was a green orc born from a human that had been captured and played. At the age of 10, he stood on the battlefield. There, he faced many dangers, but he lived, and in doing so, he realized his great achievements. Also, after 5 years, none could stand beside him, and he earned his place as the strongest warrior. As he was a natural-born warrior, it was further disclosed that no matter how bad the situation was, he rushed into the field and brought victory to the army. After bringing about victory, he would return to the next field of battle. Bash had always believed that he had faithfully followed his instincts as an orc, and that itself was not wrong, but it was not true either. And it was the time when he realized and came to learn that normally victors bring home women as spoils of war. In fact, there was no virgin left among any of the soldiers. But it was too late, as during the war one could just take a woman from the enemy and graduate from virginity right then. It was added that one could not do that now because of the peace treaty. The law then dictates the requirement of consent between members of another race when engaging in playing acts. However, the hero could still lose his virginity if he goes to the mating room, but reputation and the persistence of the hero would draw all manner of spectators. But there was no way that a virgin could live up to the prowess of his name, and if the fact that the hero was a virgin were to spread, the honor of his tribe would be trampled into dust. That was why he had decided to keep that secret of his virginity from everyone else. But on the other hand, he wasn't ready to get rid of that virginity. As a strong warrior had a duty to leave an offspring, and being the orc's hero, he wanted to push a woman and leave the seed of his line inside her right then. But he does not want to disappoint the younger generation too. Bash further told that it had been 3 years as the unease hung over his head. Bash reached 28 years of age, and no matter how hard an orc trains himself, if he reaches 30 and remains a virgin, a mark would appear on his forehead, and he would become an orc mage when an orc mark appears. The orc mages were trained in seclusion to serve their country. But normally, joining the ranks of the orc mages would be one of honor and praise. But for a warrior such as Bash, there was no greater shame, and people would ask if for what he claimed the victory if he had not enjoyed the spoils of the war. As the scene returned to present, he had come to his house and was thinking that it would be a walking disgrace, and then decided to go, so he geared up himself with all his armor. He then reached the king's palace, where the king stated that from the looks in his eyes, it seemed like he had already decided, and he agreed. The king further added that he did not have to say any more as the king understood. Also, he had heard the rumors of him never showing up to the mating room. And at the end, he asked him if he was going to search for his wife. Hearing that, the hero got astonished, and while bowing his head contemplated if he realized that he was a virgin and of the fact that he was thinking of graduating from it without anyone knowing. He further pondered that if he realized everything, including the fact that he wished that his partner would be a virgin too, and the fact that he was thinking of taking such a woman to be his wife, and then practice having fun with her all day. After all that thinking, he asked the king if he had realized and then pleaded him not to stop him. And the king clarified that he would not stop him and then asked him to just go and he would not tell others about that matter. After listening to it, Bash started contemplating how the king could be so thoughtful and kind to not say anything about someone as pathetic as him and to give him a chance to regain his honor. It was then disclosed that Orc King Nemesis was surely a man of caliber fit to be called as king, and he should pledge his loyalty to that great man until death. At the end, he expressed his gratitude to the king. When he left, one of the men at the place asked the king if that was the hero and further asked where he was going to while looking like that. The king replied while clenching his fist that he was going to a trial of proving that he was a true hero. As the tradition, the orc hero should have a wife, but right then, even as a king, he did not have the power to give him a wife, and there was no precedent for an orc acquiring a woman other than playing with her. As the war had ended and the peace treaty had been signed, the hero could peacefully live in a village, but he had decided to go on a journey, and it was like he was trying to uphold the pride of the orcs, even though they had lost the war. At the end, he declared that he was truly a hero. And it was like when the Great War had come to an end, in that era of peace, a soldier set foot on a journey. He was the strongest man, the hero, Bash, who was on a journey to meet his wife and to lose his virginity. There was a popular saying in the world that if one wishes to breed, one must first do it. Also, human beings were very fertile and very easy to conceive, though there were individual differences, and their bodies were strong, and their appearances were not bad. Also, for orcs, they were a very good breeding stock. As Bash followed that maxim without hesitation, it was disclosed that in the midst of the orc country, a fort that he and his countrymen had defended until the end of the war and beyond, that the human X city was there. Bash stated that he missed the fort as he heard it had already been demolished. Just then, Bash smelled something and contemplated that there was a faint smell of blood. If there was a beast near, they could get some food. And he decided to go there, so he plunged to that place at full speed. He saw from a distance and wondered if that was a group of bugbears attacking some humans. On a closer look, it was found there were two girls trembling in fear. So, in order to scare off the bears, Bash growled at them. After a while, the bugbears got fearful and started running to the bushes. He then looked at those two girls and realized that they were quite a pair. He clarified that by most orc standards, those women were not very pretty, but in all his years on the battlefield, Bash had never seen a woman up close until then. He then gathered the courage and asked them if they would like to sire his children. In orcish customs, that was considered a proposal, but that proposal sounded crazy to them, and they got terrified. They exclaimed that they were going to be played, so they ran away from there. He was totally astonished and asked why they did that as he could not understand. Suddenly, he heard a noise coming out of a box falling from the carriage. He picked up a bottle of something, and when he opened it, a Zell came out and identified itself as its master. It stated that it had been a long time. Bash was not pleased, so he asked how he could forget someone like her. She thanked him for saving her, telling him that she thought she would be locked up in a bottle for the rest of her life. If her master had not helped her, she would be dead by the time she got home. But he had always been there for her. At the end, she asked him what was the matter and if he had been or had forgotten about them. She further asked how did he know that they had been attacked, and he replied that he did not know and it was a coincidence. She then turned and looked at the carriage, exclaiming that he had attacked a man's carriage. So, it was a betrayal as well as a rebellion. Bash told her that he had not done that, and it was the bugbears. Hearing that, she screamed at him, asking him not to expect that they would believe him. If a simple-minded human walked past and saw him next to the broken wagon, he would think that he had attacked the wagon. She further added that if he was with a group, they would form a strike force and surround him before he got a chance to move. On the other hand, he was thinking that he would like a good fight. She then heard someone calling and asked Bash if he was going to fight them. Bash then understood that it was not a good idea to fight when he was trying to find a wife in the land of humans. So, he told Zell that they would withdraw, and she agreed. While moving ahead, he asked her how she was captured. She started telling him that she was an adventurous person with a curious mind, so she was looking for something she had not seen yet. Before she could say any further, he asked her to stop as he had heard enough. So, she asked him that he should have gotten to know what he was looking for, and he had already understood that she probably left the country out of boredom and got caught while playing around. Later she asked him what he was doing, as she heard that he had earned the title of hero in the land of orcs. She thought that would mean that he had won all the respect of orcs and was living a happy life without any problems. And then she asked him if anyone had gotten jealous and tricked him. Bash told her that orcs were not jealous of heroics and the chieftain was still alive. So, she asked them why he was there. After a while, she realized that he did not seem to tell her, so she clarified that she could be dead if she could not meet him. From then on, she would be staying with him for the rest of their lives. She added that she would like to help him the way she could but wondered if he could understand how sensitive and caring she was. On the other hand, he was thinking about how she smelled good at gathering information and was familiar with the lifestyle many species had. So, he was sure that she would be able to help him with the task ahead. Hence, he told her after a while that he was looking for a wife. She understood and stated that a wife was a very special thing for an orc. If he was a hero like himself, it was not surprising for him to have a wife. But then added that in the state of affairs in orc lands, it was nearly impossible to find a satisfactory wife. After stating all this, she foolishly asked him if her master went off on a journey to find a wife, and he agreed to that. His agreement made her think that the master was wanting a wife and disclosed that she would have done that if she was not a fairy. Then she declared that she would take care of that, and then told Bash that not many women want to be an orc's wife these days, but she was sure that they could find 10 or 20 wives in no time at all. He then replied that if she insisted, then he would leave it to her. After knowing that she was in charge, she told him that they were off to the city, as there were no beautiful women or pretty girls in the woods, and then declared to get to the city of humans. The scene then shifted to the forfeited city, Crassel. Zell was seen stating that she heard that the orcs and humans fought numerous times for occupancy in the city, so it was not a wonder that everyone was wary of him. She then added that still, she did not think it would take 3 hours to just enter the city. Hearing that, she asked him if all the human settlements were like that, but she told him to go to an inn first. There, it looked like the gatekeeper had not treated Bash well. So, she asked how that gatekeeper was treating Bash like some unknown stray orc, as even rudeness has its limits. When he entered the city, he stated that there were a lot of women, and it was a human city after all. He realized that with that many around, he could choose freely. But just then, he shook off the thought, exclaiming that he wanted to look at the human's left hand. After seeing a ring on one of the women's left hand, he understood that she was already married. After a while, he realized that most of them had a ring. She then told him that humans at that time had, in general, a one-woman, one-man rule going on. So they needed to look for those who did not have that ring on their fingers. After a while, they reached an inn, where even while sighing, she exclaimed that she figured the prejudice against orcs would still strongly remain. She stated that the men they saw in the city thought that he would just discriminate and slaughter them, and the women thought that he would discriminate, play, and impregnate them. He then told her that it was not entirely untrue, as it was how it was during the war. She added that wartime orcs were a fresh memory for the humans, and she thinks they would be wary of orcs for the last few years, but she had not thought that they would be so wary that they would run away once they saw him. Bash then told her that he had faced that caution before he met her, so she asked him by what way did he say to call them out. He replied that she asked them to be their children. Hearing that, she bonked her head and stated that it was not good. Then she started describing to him that for humans, the act of conceiving was an important ritual with religious nuance. She then told him that things like marriage and bearing children were something they only do with someone they love, and there was no way they would bear the children of some stranger they just met. He understood the concept, and she added that that was why in order to take a human woman, he needed to make her fall in love with him. Hearing that, he clarified that he did not know how to do so. So she told him that it was where she came in, as despite her appearance, she was pretty knowledgeable on humans. So he praised her, stating that she was reliable, and he must have good fortune to be able to meet her at the very start of his journey. She then asked him to let her tell the specifics, and he agreed. She said that firstly, human females love cleanliness, and being dirty and smelly was a big turn-off. So lesson 1 was to look neat. So he asked if he should bathe before searching for a woman. She then told him that after bathing, he had to put on that thing that he uses before fighting the beastmen. So lesson 2 was to smell nice. She added that it was useful for evading beastmen scouting squads, and then asked if it stinks, and further stated that orcs do not like the smell of sweets. She asked if he was also like that. So, he disclosed to her that it was not a smell he liked, but he did not particularly hate it either. After all, those who did not put it on because they did not like the smell all died at the hands of beastmen they fought against. She called it good and told him that she would lend him hers, as it was a top-notch one that not only prevented him from getting jumped by the beastmen but also liked by the humans. They then called out for the inn, and she told him that his master was going to bathe, so they needed to get some water in a tub. And then told Bash that for the meantime, she would teach him something else. So she then started telling him that anyway if he kept to their principle, he would at least score a girl. And then he asked for the clarification of the principles and if they were to look clean, not smell bad, and be confident. He stopped in the middle of the talk and took out his sword, so Zell asked him if they were being attacked. He replied to her that he could sense a silent magic and they were completely surrounded, also by the number of people and the presence. He presumes that these were the same people as the ones they heard at the horse carriage. Zell got startled and asked if that meant that they were being followed. Bash then told her that he could not feel the presence of being followed and then clarified that they were dealing with humans there, so he could not be sure they might have been. She continued and asked him what he was going to do, as she did not think that it was just going to be an easy fight with just those numbers of humans. But it was a sudden change of heart as he put down his sword and stated that they must solve it by talking to them. She agreed but told him that the only outcome she could see was that they would blame them and chase them out of the town. And even though the fact they pursued them there, it meant that they knew that they were in that place. Just then, the inn door got bashed, and the soldier came in asking him to freeze and stand down. While having his hand locked, he clarified that he already was and then asked them to state their business. Out of nowhere, another soldier entered the inn, and she removed her helmet. It was revealed that it was a beautiful girl. She told him that they had a report that a horse carriage was attacked by an orc at the highway and then asked if he was it or not. The beautiful woman that appeared in front of Bash was the female knight, and she was so beautiful, according to Bash. He further contemplated that compared to the women he saw in the forest that he tried to walk on the way, they were nothing in front of her. She was several times more beautiful, and he wondered if he could make her his wife. He at least wanted 3 kids with her. But the very next minute, he thought if it would be suitable for a hero to have a popular female knight as a wife and if he could protect the orc's pride. He was still thinking that only if he could make her a wife when she interfered and asked for his answer. He was not listening to her and continued thinking that he could not just ask her to be his wife all of a sudden. First of all, he needed to inspect her left hand, but he realized that he could not see it because of her gloves. It was then when she got pissed and asked him to answer her and not to test her patience. So, he apologized and clarified that it was true that he was seen near the carriage, but it was not him who attacked it. When he called out to them, they ran away. She then asked him not to lie. When he told her that he was not lying, that when he arrived at the scene, it was already attacked by the bugbears, and he just passed by and scared the bugbears. So she asked for proof in return. Hearing that, he remembered lesson 3 of always behaving in a dignified manner. So he told her boldly that he had no proof, but he swore on the name of the great orc king Nemesis that he did not do it. It made the female knight and the soldier confused, but he thought that it was resolved as swearing on the great orc king's name meant that if it was proven to be a lie, then only death awaited them. That declaration could only be used by the great lord class warriors or above, and for the orc, there was no declaration as meaningful as that. The confused soldier then asked the knight what he meant by swearing on the orc king's name. She replied to him not to ask, and it might be that he just wanted them to be scared by shouting a name like that. After that, she told him that the victims were saying that an orc approached them with the intention of having reproduction with them. So, he told her that engaging in the playing act with the other race without permission was strictly prohibited in the name of the orc king. That was why he asked for their consent. This clarification made her furious, so she told him that there was no way that he would get consent. Bash replied that one would not know if one would not try, and clarified that he found out later that an orc would never get consent from the human race if one would suddenly propose for reproduction. All that explanation made her think about what was wrong with him. The usual stray orcs would try to play with the women or say disgusting things like playing with them as soon as they saw a woman. Even interrogating them for even a little bit would make them angry, and they would attack. Also, it had never happened before, so she screamed out that even if he was just passing by, an orc like him would have stolen something from that carriage. He replied positively to that, and she got pissed and exclaimed that she was right and also she was putting him under arrest for stealing. Just then, a small hand waved in front of them asking for a minute. It was Zell, and she told her that it was about her. It was true that she was caught by humans and stuffed in a bottle loaded inside that carriage. As per the agreements between the humans and the fairies, trafficking would be prohibited. So she asked her if it was not strange that he was being arrested for stealing when he was helping a fairy to escape from being smuggled. The female knight got startled and then screamed out that by any means, he should be coming with them. Bash agreed, and Zell asked her if it was okay that just that bunch of people were looking down at him. He stated that it was okay. He then started thinking that it was truly fascinating that the female knight that was in front of him was of his taste. But he did not know if she was a virgin or not, and he still could not decide whether he should marry her or not. He was happy thinking that she did not scream or run away when she saw her face, and she even asked him to follow her. And then understood that if he followed her, then he would have a more opportunity to talk with her, and if he did not follow her then, there would not be any chances. Moreover, if he rampaged around in the town and got chased out, then he would never see her again. That was why there was no reason for him to refuse. The knight then called it good and ordered to put handcuffs over him and to take them with him. The handcuffs were locked in his hands, and he thought of using that opportunity and making her his wife. The scene then shifted to a different location, where one inspector was seen asking the other if he caught the suspect for the assault on the highway. The other officer replied positively and clarified that it was an orc. So the officer further asked him if he did not tell him to kill it if it was a stray orc. He clarified that he might not be a stray orc based on how well he was dressed and how he was able to answer all those questions during the interrogation. Then the officer told him to let him go, but the man told him that Judith said that he was still suspicious. As he took her name, he bashed his head and asked himself if it was too early for her to entrust the investigation and wondered who was going to take the responsibility if that became a war with orcs. So he asked the other man for his views. The other man clarified that there were too many suspicious things in his story. He did not even say the reason for his journey, and he had got a fairy tagging along with him. Also, even though he surrendered, he acted in a very calm manner. At the end, he added that there was a chance that he could be a spy, which made the higher officer laugh harder. So, the other officer told Houston that it was not a laughing matter, as he thought that he got caught on purpose to steal information from the inside. The higher officer told him that there was no way an orc would pull off being a spy, and if there could be a spy, then it should be the fairy. He thought that if that was in the middle of the war, then an orc and a fairy working together would make him think that it must be a strategy. But he was a little bit curious about the fairy tagging along, so he stated that he would go and watch the interrogation. He left and reached the place of interrogation. When he was heading to the cell, the officer alongside him stated that it was pretty safe to meet an orc when the pig killer Houston is with them. He told him that just because he was going would not change the outcome. As for the Houston case, his life as a commander started by stating that there was no one better than him commanding. Also, 10 years ago, he was a commander who brilliantly commanded the retreat force, worn out and defeated army members comprising 60% of the original army. 5 years later, Houston, who had served as an adjutant during his military service, became the new general after the death of the old general. After that, Houston observed the orcs way more than anyone else, learned from the past literature, and heard things from the prisoners of war. The result was that he learned that orcs had different common sense and had a huge pride of being a warrior, sometimes in a good way, but there was no need to hate the orcs as much as one thinks. He also came to respect them when he came close to them, and the reason was that they were strict with stray orcs because they could not follow these simple rules and live as they wanted, which was no different than vermin. Also, as a general during the war and with that kind of knowledge, he killed more orcs than anyone else, and that was why he was nicknamed as Houston the Pig Killer. As they reached the outside of the investigation room, he heard the knight asking Bash to just tell her the reason for his journey, and what was his goal of coming out of the forest, and why did he come to Crassel. She further asked him why the fairy was tagging along with him. All these questions made Houston think that she was good despite being a new recruit. She was a woman interrogating an orc with huge pride, so there was no way that she would get a clear answer. But just then, Bash replied to her questions that the purpose of his journey was due to personal reasons, and it was the easiest way of finding something. That was why he traveled through that forest, as it was the fastest route. He further added that the fairy was his old friend who knows the reason for his journey, and decided to help him. The reason he came there was that he was searching for something that was probably there. All this made Houston totally stunned, and he realized that it wasn't a stray but a warrior. She further asked him to tell her what he was searching for and why he was searching for it. He replied negatively that he could not answer that. On the other hand, Houston was thinking about what an experienced warrior was going out of the country and searching for something. But he just then remembered that he had somewhere heard the orc's voice and felt numbed. He then told the officer that it seemed to him that he would not get in after all, and then thought that he was having a bad feeling about that, and then calmed himself down that it was not like that he would lose his life. But he entered the room asking Judith to not overdo it, as if it becomes a diplomatic issue then it was not going to be good. But as soon as he saw Bash sitting there, he froze in his location and was not able to complete his sentence. All the flashbacks started running in front of him when he ran away from him. He started identifying him with various names, such as Berserker, Destroyer, Slaughterer, Rampager, the Orc Hero, Demon of the Siwanchi Forest, Green Calamity, and the Dragon Beheader. At the end, he thought why the Orc Hero Bash was over there, and after seeing the fairy, he asked why Zelda Bader was also there. He then turned to Judith and asked what she was doing, and she told him that she got a report from someone who was attacked by an orc in the forest, and when she was doing an investigation, she got a report of a suspicious orc coming to the city. She added that so she immediately tracked him down and arrested him at the inn, and moreover, they were in the middle of the investigation. After hearing this, he thought that Bash was arrested by mistake, and if Bash was really the attacker, then he would not leave any evidence. If he really was guilty, then he could just destroy everything in the path and had escaped. Moreover, handling 200 men should be an easy task for him. While he was in his thoughts, she grabbed him by his neck and stated that she got most of her answers with him, and now what was left was the reason for his journey. She then called him a lowly pig and asked him to spit it out. This act made Houston terrified and he asked for no violence. But when Bash stated calmly that there was nothing left to say, Houston wondered why he was not angry. He then looked at Bash's nose and realized that the twitching nose was because of the scent, and he understood that he calmed down because of the citrus scent, which was coming from the cell, as orcs were omnivorous who unexpectedly like fruits too. And after that, he ordered Judith to let go of him and ordered her to step back without any commotion. He then asked him, after calling his name, what it was. So, he asked her not to call him by his name. Hearing that, she smiled and asked what he was talking about, and then advised him to tell about his great achievements. And she started telling him that he was Houston, the pig killer who slew most of the orcs during the Great War. After that, Houston could not keep himself calm, so he shouted at her and asked her to shut her mouth or else he would hit her. He then asked her to hurry up and come over there. This made the knight confused, and then he turned to Bash and apologized for her subordinate's rude behavior and then told him that she was responsible for handling the recent assault incident. But there had been no progress. That was why she was being impatient. He further apologized for his late introduction and then introduced him as Houston Jail, the supervisor of the army from that town. After that, Bash introduced himself, and Houston replied that he knew him, so Bash again asked him if he knew him, so he clarified that he had seen him several times during the war. The conversation continued, and Bash asked if he was a human warrior, and he mumbled and agreed. Hearing that, Bash smirked and told him that he felt so nostalgic and then asked if he was doing well. Houston, while calming himself of the smile, told him that it happened because of his negligence as a supervisor, and then again apologized to him. Bash told him that he was not angry, which made Houston think that considering how badly Judith treated him, and he still forgave her, so he must be a kind-hearted orc. But also there was no knowing when they would step on the tiger's tails. At the end, Houston pleaded with him if he could just ask a few questions as it would not take much of his time. Bash mocked him, stating that they had been saying the same thing for a long time. So he turned at Judith with an annoyed face and then pleaded for just a little bit. The reason was that Houston heard what happened on the highway of the West Forest, and as expected, the arrest was made by mistake since no one died during the encounter with Bash. Finally, he asked for the last thing, about if the thing he was searching for, does the Orc King know about it? Bash replied positively to it, and Houston started thinking that it might be some kind of order given to Bash by the Orc King Nemesis, and the purpose of that journey was to find something or might be to investigate something. He then told Bash that it would be a problem if he did not follow the rules of that country. Bash replied that it was a personal matter so he did not plan to create any problems. This made Houston think that it was something that even the Orc King could not get without relying on Bash, or more like someone. So, it seemed like killing humans and causing problems would interfere with his mission, and the only problem was details of his mission. At the end, he declared that he understood and everything then was resolved, so he offered to remove his handcuffs. Houston again apologized for taking his time and contemplated that he was glad that there was nothing to make him angry and then asked to send him before they step on the tiger's tail. And finally, he would report about it to the capital tomorrow and then it would not be his business. As the handcuffs were removed, he freed Zeal too. When Houston was advising him to be careful and not forget anything, Bash was looking at Judith. Houston again went into his thoughts about why Bash was looking at Judith. As he himself said that he was not angry, he pondered why Bash's attention was on her. He continued to think that if he missed something, it could cause problems for the town and wondered if it was because of her hatred towards the orcs. He then speculated that it must be because she was the one who had investigated the West Forest Highway. So, he asked Bash if there was any connection between his search and the assault incident on the highway. Hearing that, Zell murmured something in Bash's ears, and he agreed to it. So, after that, Houston asked him to let Judith tag along because she was responsible for finding the culprit. As he stated it, Judith asked for a minute and further inquired if he wanted her to tag alongside that creature who could only think about having fun with women. Bash informed her that the treaty forbids mating without consent, and besides, he was not going to have fun with her. Houston repeated the same, and she retorted that even Houston knew about it, that the creatures called orcs were an evil and ugly race. She expressed that even if he says something like that when they are alone, he would show his true colors. Houston got angry and screamed that it was enough. He further told her that he was different from those other stray orcs, as he was the orc hero, Bash. But she couldn't understand who an orc hero was, so she asked if he was related to the king. This foolish question made him even angrier. He thought it was happening because all the soldiers involved in the war had returned home and were living peacefully, having no trade with the orc country anymore, so they had only seen stray orcs. He then explained further that he didn't know if she knew, but he was a very special orc. He clarified to her that normally she could not even talk to him because of his status. She was in disbelief and asked him if that was so, even though he was just an orc. Houston added that even if he came to Crassel secretly, if she angered him, then she was as good as dead. If that incident incited war with the orcs, for the peaceful time, she would be put under the guillotine. She was in shock after hearing that, but suddenly Bash asked him to let her go. He instantly removed his hand and asked what was that. Bash asked him if he didn't have any shame for ordering around a woman. Houston was terrified by his bold voice and was confused about why he was covering for her, even though she treated him so badly. He concluded that Bash really had a kind heart and, moreover, overwhelming strength, but he was controlling it for the sake of his race. He was an amazing person. He then realized that from Bash's perspective, perhaps he was looking like a person who could only order someone around. He made up his mind that in the eyes of an orc, he didn't want to be seen that way. So, he stated to Bash at the end that he was right, and he would also move out to investigate the forests. It was a dream of our orc hero, Bash, where he remembered asking someone what kind of woman he liked to marry, and he replied that it must be a strong-willed woman, and it should be a human, as after all, she was going to be the bride of the Great War Chief. He replied that he understood, as the bride of the Great War Chief was still reluctant in giving birth to 3 children even after being played. Another orc stated that he wanted to achieve success in life first before getting married. After a while, one of the orcs stated that there were 5 knights and 30 infantry, and the other ordered them to attack. They located the hurdle and then attacked the convoy. Returning to reality, it was seen that he was still sleeping, and someone wished him good morning. They further asked him if he was thinking of reproducing with that woman as his weapon had been up since morning. It was Zell, and she added that the female was definitely a virgin and told him that if he stuck that magnificent thing inside her, then she definitely would scream, and then wondered if that woman was that good at screaming. He asked her why she asked that, and she, while cleaning herself, exclaimed that even if he was generous to her, it made her irritated, and further asked him if he was not really cheeky despite being a new recruit. However, Bash called it good as she was a strong-willed woman, so Zell asked him if he liked strong women that much, and he replied that every orc liked them. She then called him a husband and told him that she had already collected enough of her fairy scale powder, and he asked if that was okay. She replied positively and thanked him for his help, but she flustered and stated that when he would use it one day, she wanted him to use it in a place that she had not seen before. It was then disclosed that basically fairy scales were like healing medicines, and fairies did not want others to have their scales because to them, it was the same as their excrement. Bash added that the thing had saved his life on many occasions, so she asked him to apply it on his clothes. He started applying it by removing his cloth, but just then the door was bashed open, and it was Judith. She called for him, telling him that Houston had asked her to show him around, but she was astonished to see him all naked. He asked her what was that, and she, annoyed, asked him to hurry up and get ready and she would wait outside. He agreed, and she again bashed the door, which made Bash ask why she was angry, to which Zell added that she had been like that since the last day and asked if she was always angry like that, but added that it seemed like there was something wrong between the last day and today's situation. And he asked if that was so and concluded that humans were really difficult to understand. After a short while, when he was gearing up and getting ready, she asked him to dress up quickly as they did not want to keep the women waiting. Later, the scene got shifted to the West Forest, Crassel Highway Road, where Houston was exclaiming that the road was mainly used for traveling between Crassel and Orc Country, and he added that he could also travel to the Elven Country through that. Besides, only a few people travel using that since there were other wider and safer roads. He then told that for a long time, there were rarely any cases of wagons being attacked by demons, but recently it had been happening continuously, and hence they had told hunters about the demon beasts near the highway, and the bearers that were often found around there had been eliminated. Houston added that even after doing that, the attacks never stopped and continued with the same frequency. As he had ordered Judith to investigate in detail, she found that the number of demon beasts living near the highway was quite small, but the traces of the demon beasts were found all over the wild. Hearing that, Zell asked him if that was suspicious. He clarified that the merchant's carriage was attacked, and its cargo was stolen little by little so nobody would notice. He added that it seemed that someone was pretending to be a bugbear and attacking the wagons. Also, based on the eyewitness testimony and traces from the scene, the only logical culprit would be a bugbear. After that, Judith was in a hurry to close her first case, so she mistook Mr. Bash as the culprit and arrested him by mistake. At the end, he stated that the site was still preserved and then asked him what he thought. She got down for an investigation and clarified that it was a bugbear attack, while Judith mocked him, stating that he was just an orc after all, and then asked him if he was still looking. Hearing that, he contemplated that he was not good at that kind of stuff and he could not go on like that, but realized that he also had to show her his good points. So, she started making the conclusion that, first of all, there were no traces of any civilized race except for the merchant, and the cargo was completely untouched. He added that even if the culprit tried to cover it up, it was highly unlikely that they would take so little from the cargo as they also left behind the food and water, and if that happened during the war, they would have dismissed it as a bugbear attack. It all does not make sense to Judith, so she asked what then. He looked pale and then added that if that was done by a human then they must have had any sort of purpose, and he concluded that the whole point was to rob the merchant and attack the others to make it appear as if it was done by bugbears, and if the authorities could not figure that out, then the culprit could expand their territory for robbing. It was again a nuisance, so she called the orc stupid. Just then, Zell came there and stated that from what she knew, she could only consider that as a bugbear attack. But Judith was not pleased and mocked her, stating that of course it was, as even a child could figure out that much by just looking, and then told him that no matter how much they find, they would not find anything else. But Bash ignored her and asked them to track it down, and Zell agreed as it was a good idea. Judith could not understand the track down and asked what he was talking about. This time, Zell mocked her, stating what she meant by that question, as they were surely talking about the bugbears. Hearing that, Judith asked them what they meant by track them down, as bugbears were cunning and conniving creatures and they could very easily erase their presence and could move on. She then told them that even the best hunters could not track them down. Zell again mocked her, asking how it was that humans do things, so she asked if fairies were different. She replied negatively and clarified that fairies would not do such barbaric things like tracking and hunting them, but that day there might be a guy who was interested in tracing them down. She added that besides, bugbears were demon beasts who were abundant in the orc's territory, and if she wanted to track a bugbear, then it had to be an orc because they had been doing that for hundreds of years. On the other hand, soldiers were also keeping a lookout over them. Houston then added that he knew that orcs had a good sense of smell when it comes to monsters, but he could not believe if it would be that good. So, Bash replied that it was not a big deal, as unlike the Beast Kings, they were easy to fool. It was then disclosed that orcs had a good sense of smell, but it was not all that precise. They had a hard time distinguishing between similar smells, and the same strategy was used by Houston to lure orcs and eliminate them. So, he was a little terrified and then exclaimed that it looked like they would be reaching the bugbear den pretty soon. On the other hand, the guards were talking to themselves. One asked what was going on with Houston, as he usually despises orcs very much. The other added that maybe something happened with that orc during the war, and the third one asked if what he meant by something and if he did befriend an orc. So the other consoled him, clarifying that Houston Sama, who was the pig killer, was being just a little generous. He added that there were some good guys among the harpies and the lizard man, so it would not be strange if there were some nice orcs. At the end, one stated that he guessed so, but that orc seemed quite special to him. All this was being heard by Judith. Suddenly, Bash turned towards her, and she got confused, but he smirked while looking at her. He got annoyed looking that he smirked and thought that he was mocking her, and asked if he was thinking that she was not worthy enough to fight him. But Bash did not mean that, as he was just exercising lessons 4 and 5, which were a smoldering gaze and enigmatic smile. That was told by Zell to him that human women were vulnerable to a man's gaze, as they were especially weak to mysterious men. She added that a man who could make an enigmatic smile while looking at her with a sexy gaze was sure to make her heart skip a beat. Suddenly, Bash stopped and Houston asked what was that, so he replied that they were almost there. As the soldiers behind were generating some noise, he asked Judith to silence them. She agreed and then took a stick, a pebble-like something, and started performing the task. After a short while, it was time for Bash, and when she touched him, she startled, and then apologized after giving an excuse that her hands were cold. She stated that if she did not touch him, then she could not do that, and then asked him to be quiet. While she was performing her task, he contemplated that he did not know that a woman's hand could be that soft, as he wanted to embrace her then, as during the war, he had seen many battalion captains carry a woman with him, and she had gone half crazy and wildly flailing around when he did nothing more than grab her. He then concluded that he most likely did not want to mate with her at that time, but judging from her reaction, humans did not see it that way, and then understood that if someone did that in today's world, then it would be considered as a non-consensual play relationship. He just then remembered lesson 6, that the man who snorts too much is not popular. He then continued his thoughts that orcs get excited to battle or near a woman and express it by snorting, but humans do not appreciate it and find it barbaric and savage. But he was a patient one. Just then, Zell told Houston to look there, and he agreed to scout that area first. Zell then exclaimed that if that was reconnaissance, then leave it to her, and she would even dive into Mount Buffer's crater, and then stated that she would be back before sunrise. Hearing that, Houston stated that if they leave it to Zell, then there should not be any problem, and Bash agreed, as Houston then suggested that for the time being, they had to wait until she returned. However, Bash knew that Zell almost always manages to find the enemy, but at the same time, there was always a 50-50 chance that the enemy would notice her and catch her. And as expected, Zell did not come back. When she did not come back, Bash stated that it looked like she had been caught, and it also looked like someone was controlling the bugbears. Houston was shocked to hear that and asked if there was a beast tamer. So, Judith stated that if that was the case then they should go in right away as they could rescue the fairy, kill the bugbears, and arrest the beast tamer. But Houston denied her call, stating that they would wait till night, as they didn't know the layout of their hideout, and they didn't even know the number of the enemies. So if they went in unprepared, they would be killed. He concluded that they would attack at night and then asked Bash if he was right. He also agreed to his call, and she asked him what he was waiting for as his friend was being held captive. She further asked if the orcs were not supposed to be brave warriors that fought with courage against all odds. He replied positively that they fought courageously against all odds, and the orc warrior also followed orders, so whatever the commander decides, he would follow. Houston then remembered that orcs had a law that when they were staying in other village clans' villages, they had to follow the orders of the clan leader. Or in other words, Houston was happy that Bash thought that he was the clan leader. Bash then added that Zell would be fine, but Judith stated that she does not know if what he was basing that on, but then stopped, stating that they do not have time for that. She then turned to Houston and pleaded to give her the order as she would lead the soldiers, and they would go in and kill everyone inside. Houston replied that it was often said that fairies would not be killed, but it was not absolute and asked if there was any reason to believe that. Bash clarified to them that Zell survived the war and then told them that all fairies could produce fairy dust, but some people believe that killing them makes you cursed and even fairies die if they were killed. He added that Zell was a fairy that had been caught numerous times during the war and had still managed to survive. And at first, it seemed like she was incredibly lucky. Houston understood and then asked if she was a booby-trapped bait, and then clarified that he was not entirely convinced but they had to hope for the best. After that, he ordered everyone to be on standby and wait for his further orders as they would keep an eye on the cave and strike when they were asleep. Yet Judith was not convinced and stated that one of their allies was being held captive right then. So Houston replied that that was why he was making sure that it was perfect because they did not have time to go back and call for backup and that was why they would strike at night. While he was explaining, she asked him what should not be then. He replied that it was too dangerous and that was why he ordered them to be on standby more. She got worried and felt helpless. She thought that the commander was emphasizing more on the words of Bash instead of her, and if that continued like that, then Bash would take credit for solving that case. She then clarified that she was unhappy about it, and she guessed that she could not help since it was her first mission after all. On the other hand, Houston was thinking that although he took command of that case from the Midway, but now when he was in charge, he had to get all his men back alive and solve that case. So he then ordered the men that one of them would be on the lookout duty while the others would rest to get some sleep. He again asked Bash if that was right, so he replied that he would follow his orders. Bash was still thinking of Judith's touch when Houston ordered Jen that he would be on the lookout duty, and if anything happens, he had to wake him up. After a while, someone was seen asking if she was going to sleep and then asked Judith to go on and save the fairy by themselves. Judith replied that it would be disobeying the order. So one of the soldiers replied that something was going on with Houston ever since he had met with that orc and maybe that orc had done something on Houston. He added that he was sure that Houston would understand once the mission was a success. Just then, one other man asked if the fairy was killed then would it not be like putting the cart before his horse, but others asked to just do it right away. The scene then shifted inside the cave, where Zell was screaming that she was just passing by, though, and further explained that while she was traveling alone with just clothes on her back, she found a cave that looked nice, but she had no idea it was their home, and she apologized from the bottom of her heart for intruding. She apologized again and again for disturbing them, and then told them that she could make fairy dust. There were 4 bandits there, and one of them asked if that meant that they did not need to kill that fairy. The other agreed, and the third one stated that there was no way that he would do it as he did not want to be cursed. She then asked them how about they untie her and she and everyone would shower in her dust and asked if that does not sound good. The man understood and asked if he looked stupid to her. She denied it and stated that they should untie her as the powder goes out well when she is untied. She added that she produced so much of it that other fairies gave her a nickname of Powder Blower back in her hometown. They understood that she was too noisy. Just then, someone came there and asked what was going on. It was the boss of the group, who was an orc too, and she identified him. The very next moment, she called him chief and stated that it had been a long time and then introduced herself. He also identified her and asked if she was the one who was Bash's buddy, and then asked what she was doing there. The fairy was really cunning as she had seen him somewhere, but she wondered who she was. She then told him to listen to her that after the war was over she got bored and started traveling around the world. She further added that then she came across the cave and she told herself that it was a nice cave. Moreover, it smelled like treasure to her. But when she went in, she found out that the smell was coming from stinky thieves who had not bathed, and at the end, pleaded with him to help her. Hearing that, he ordered the men to untie her as he knew her. The man confirmed him as if he was sure, as fairies were famous for loudmouths and he could not let anyone know that they were there. So, the chief took her up and asked that she not tell anyone about that secret. She replied while smiling that she would not, and then asked him if she had told those secrets before. It added that if she was that much of a blabbermouth that Bash would have already died over 1,000 years ago in the war, and a memorial statue would have been made for him back in the Orc country. He then threw her to the man and asked him to free her. After being free, she thanked him for helping out and then asked him what he was doing with that bunch of humans. He was not that pleased and then stated that the Orc King wanted to be buddy-buddy with humans, and he thought about what good was an orc if they could not fight, so he left on his own and he met those guys. She then asked him if all those guys were warriors looking for a fight and then asked if those guys kill everyone like a destroyer. He replied that it was what he tried to do but it did not work out, and then added that right then he was slowly accumulating power so nobody, neither human nor an orc, could find out, and when he would be strong enough, he would begin the full-scale activities. She exclaimed blissfully that and thought that she had heard about their plans, so she should probably be back. Just then, he noticed something inside the cave and then exclaimed that there was something down there. The chief smiled and stated that it was not a thing and if she forgot that he was a beast tamer. She was then shocked to see that he was controlling the bugbears and then started contemplating that she remembered him. His name was Boggs, and he was a battalion captain. He was Boggs, Beastmaster, who was accompanied by hundreds of bugbears that had sent thousands of human beings to their graves. However, their number had decreased quite a bit, and after seeing some babies, she realized that it was just for them, as he was steadily increasing their numbers. He added that he would train them up for the strongest army that had ever been seen, and when it happens, he would take over as the new Orc King and would conquer the world. Just then, they heard some noise and asked what was going on, and Boggs added that there were intruders and then asked them to go on. Hearing that, one of his men extinguished the lamp and Jin wondered from where did they come from. And after seeing Judith there, their man exclaimed that there was a woman, but she was not able to face them properly as there was no light. It was a mess everywhere, and they asked somebody to get some light over there, and another added that he did not know as it was too dark there. Someone again asked for some light, and Zell was thinking that it was weird as if Bash had been fighting. Then the sound shall be louder and flashier, and then concluded that it was not a good idea to move around carelessly. After a short while, Judith was captured and was bashed on the ground. So Zell asked what was going on, and the chief replied that it looked like the local knight had come there to take them down. However, on the other hand, Judith was totally shocked to see that Zell was talking goody-goody with the chief. But the men there were in a different mood, and one of them asked if he could get the women, and the other replied that the women were for everyone.